Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex today. We have a very important and interesting guest that's going to be coming on in just a minute or so. It's Dr. William Pepper. Now, Dr. Pepper is a human rights law advocate. He is a barrister from the United Kingdom, admitted to the bar in numerous jurisdictions throughout the United States. Now, he was involved in the televised trial of James Earl Ray. It was a mock trial to attempt to get Ray the trial that he never had. And he's also been involved in a recent trial trying to get a retrial for Sirhan Sirhan, filing motions to get a retrial based on new evidence that has surfaced as recently as within the last 10 years. There's been a lot of evidence that's surfaced about that, so we're going to talk to him about that, as well as cases that are breaking now. One thing I want to get his opinion on, and this is a breaking piece of news, the judges who preside over America's secret court. This is out of Reuters. It says 12 of the 14 judges who have served this year on the most secret court in America are Republicans. Half are former prosecutors. What we're seeing here with the FISA court, we're told not to worry about all these releases of NSA snooping because it's all been authorized by these judges. Well, it turns out that they fly them in for a short period of time. They're actually working on, as regular judges in their jurisdiction, they fly them in from time to time. They do a cursory review of this stuff and just say, go ahead and do it. There's not any sense of a reasonable cause when you give the government permission to look at the phone information for millions of American customers. Don't tell me that they did any kind of an investigation about that. So what we're going back to is we're kind of overthrowing the rule of law and the overthrow of things like star chambers. We're going back to things that we'd hoped we'd left behind in the dark ages. And so I'd like to get Dr. Pepper's comment about that. Dr. Pepper, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be with you.
What do you think about that? What do you think of the secret courts that we're told that we don't have anything to worry about because all these FISA releases are being overseen by a judge and so in a secret court? So they've okayed that, and we're not allowed to see those decisions, what the basis of that was, but we should be reassured that we have judges, even though they're secret, looking over this stuff. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the basis of any democracy is accountability, and ultimately accountability to the people. And one of the problems with secrecy of any kind, including the deliberations that go before the FISA courts, is that the people are not given the opportunity to understand the underlying basis and reason for, as you did say, the decisions that are being made. When you have a situation where, as we did have in America, and in my view, this is not the country I grew up in, you had a separation of powers that meant something, where there was a crossover in terms of checks and balances, and we're moving further and further away from that. And I think you're quite right, into a more secretive society. And the FISA courts are, which have been around for some time now, are only one example of the movement towards secrecy and the unaccountability of the government, particularly the executive. And if you had a Congress that was willing to look at the actions of the executive, and here you have to understand the executive acts also by executive order, and those executive orders so many people in the United States don't even know anything about. And,
absolutely.
Yet the last two presidents have exhibited a great tendency to rule by executive order. So we don't have congressional accountability. Despite a lot of the bluff and the bluster that goes on over nothing, really. And
right.
Major issues are just ignored. So I think the people should be aware, and I think people should be concerned, and look to trying to reestablish the rule of law in an accountable way.
What do you think about the parallels to the Nixon impeachment when we look at what Obama has done? To me, it's amazing the parallels, the nature of what he was accused of, basically using the IRS against enemies, wiretapping people. We see the same things happening with the Obama administration, but the magnitude and the extent of it are so much greater, and yet there's absolutely no talk about impeachment from either party.
Well, I mean, this guy is in league with the ruling forces of the society.
Right.
And they dominate the Congress, and they control the whole process of impeachment.
And that's exactly what you were saying in the beginning. You said that this is not the country that you grew up in, because when Nixon was around, at least there was some checks and balances going on from one branch to the other. The Congress would actually stand up and say something about some of these illegal actions, whereas today they just are complicit and go along with it.
Well, yeah, you don't have any devotion to the Constitution,
no.
Really, with few exceptions. And I'm going to say there are some exceptions, but with few exceptions, the Constitution seems to be capable of being ameliorated, pushed aside, all in the name of this new war, this war on terror. And now they're moving this the fear of terrorism very clearly into the domestic side of things. You know, foreign terrorists were the major concern after 9/11. Well, we've crossed that bridge, and we're now involved with concern about domestic terrorism. And I think the number of war games that the Pentagon has slated, and they're available on the Pentagon's website, are indicative of the fact that they are now gearing up for massive crackdown.
Absolutely.
And I think it's going to ultimately lead to a suppression of all dissent. I think that's where it's heading.
We've talked over and over again on this show about how they have set up war games, as you mentioned it, in various cities where they go in and they have joint exercises between the military and the police. And it's being done on an increasingly frequent basis. Part of it is getting people accustomed to that. But the other part of it is, as they said, they like to train in a scenario that they're going to be engaged in. So when you see them in American cities working with the police, you can understand that they're not training for the invasion of Syria, because they don't think that they're going to get the cooperation of the police in Syria. They're training for domestic oppression. That's what they're training in with these different exercises. Don't you believe that?
Well, yeah, they've been at this for a long time. The militarization of the police has been going on for well over 35 years. It's been gradual. Mm-hmm. They've been infiltrated by intelligence agencies and the Defense Department, and I think it's virtually complete at this point in time. And the Americans, it's happening right under their noses. Unfortunately, they don't know, and maybe don't want to know. There's a whole psychological mindset that I think you have to be very conscious of and aware of, and it's very easy for citizens in a republic like this to go into a situation of denial, where they just don't want to know. And that is what's most frightening to me, because the only two roads to power and change are money and numbers. Since we know who controls the money, the numbers are the only route available. And if you don't have a mobilized population, as the Occupy movement in its infancy attempted to establish, we're in deep trouble here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about is the Sirhan Sirhan case, because that is something that just came up recently, and you're trying to get a new trial for Sirhan Sirhan based on evidence there. It's a fascinating case that's there, but I guess part of it that fascinates me is the fact, and I really respect what you've done, because when you stand up against something that is the narrative of the mainstream media, like the case of the Sirhan Sirhan, you get called a conspiracy theorist, you get ridiculed, and yet it's not an open and shut case. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I and my colleague Laurie Dusick agreed to take on the Sirhan habeas corpus petition after his then current lawyer Larry Cheater died. We didn't do it. I didn't do it quickly, and I didn't do it surreptitiously or frivolously, because of exactly what you say. I have to be very careful. I try to be very careful about getting involved in causes and fights, because if your fight is not well grounded, if your position is not substantial, you do get attacked. And if you make a mistake along the way, and no matter how small or minor, that of course will be magnified. So you really do have to be when you're coming up against the forces involved in these kinds of cases, and I'm talking about political assassinations, you really do have to be very careful. And I studied that file for a better part of a couple of years, and before I finally agreed to do it. Remember, when I agreed to represent James Earl Ray, I had taken 10 years of working on that case before I agreed to represent James, who was after me for a long time, to do it.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be absolutely certain that he played, not only did he not do it, but he played no knowing role in the assassination of Martin King. So I started in 78. It was 88 before I took him on. With respect to Sirhan, we came on in around 2007, I guess, after we really went carefully through the file. Now, this wasn't a particularly important case for me personally, because as I knew Martin King the last year of his life and was very close to him during that period when I was much younger and I'd come back as a journalist from Vietnam, I also knew Bobby Kennedy. I was his Citizens Chairman when he ran for the Senate in New York State in 1964 in Westchester County. I ran his campaign, and though I was very young, I had a fairly large following of reform type.
Hang on, Dr. Pepper. We're gonna continue. I want to hear the rest of this, and I know everybody's going to want to hear about the Sirhan Sirhan case because it's not an open and shut case as we've been told. Hang on, we'll be back after the break.
The important thing about the Pro 1 filter today is that the material we use for removing fluoride and other heavy metals now will remove the latest form of fluoride called hydrofluorosilicic acid. There's no other fluoride reduction filter out there that will remove that type of fluoride. And it's extremely important because today we're hearing more and more cities are using that form of fluoride.
We've been having medication forced on us through the water system for quite a while. Most people don't realize it. Most people don't realize the negative effects of fluoride.
There's a wide range of health effects that are attributed to fluoride.
Bottom line, why should somebody get this new Pro 1 ProPure filter?
The reason to buy the Pro 1, it's an all-in-one filter. It's convenient, easy to use. It doesn't require the add-on fluoride filter. And in addition, this filter removes the latest form of fluoride called hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Dr. William Pepper. We had a trial for the Martin Luther King assassination, the trial that James Earl Ray never got. And just recently, he has moved for a retrial of Sirhan Sirhan based on some new evidence that turned up in 2004. And it's very interesting to see that it may take a very long time. As he mentioned just before the break, he spent 10 years investigating the Martin Luther King assassination before he decided to take the case. Even though he was in touch with the Martin Luther King family, they had questions about the story as presented by the government. And of course, there had never been a trial because James Earl Ray pled guilty so that he would not get the death penalty. And it takes a long time for the truth to come out. We're just learning this week that a new documentary is coming out about the Flight 800, the TWA Flight 800, that happened about 17 years ago, blew up in midair, had a lot of witnesses say that they saw a missile. They saw something that looked like flares going out and up to the plane and then exploding in the plane. We had transcriptions of pilots talking to the air traffic control saying the similar thing. We had the FBI going around and confiscating data from people. Now we've got 6 whistleblowers who are probably now retired and want to get the truth out. We saw the same thing with the Oklahoma City bombing with A Noble Lie. And now we have a documentary that is coming out from InfoWars. We're going to have that exclusively here at InfoWarsShop.com. And that is State of Mind. And it talks about mind control and how that's been around for quite some time. And that actually plays a part in the Sirhan Sirhan story. Tell us a little bit about that, Dr. Pepper.
Right. Well, I mean, we can go through the litany of evidence in the Sirhan case. We became convinced that he was totally and is actually innocent of the assassination and was used as a patsy. We had initially suspected that there was some mind control activity at work because of his failure to remember very critical events in the pantry consistently, historically, over the years, which would in fact have enabled him to explain what was happening. So what one of the things we did was to bring in Dr. Daniel Brown from Harvard, who's a specialist in hypnoprogramming. Hypnoprogramming doesn't mean hypnotism alone. It's the use of chemicals and drugs in combination with hypnosis.
And this is something that the CIA has admitted to doing since at least the 60s, going back to the 50s, actually, with Frank Olson. It was already well into it. He died sometime in the 1950s.
Yeah, they've been involved in this tactic for quite a long period of time,
right?
And have developed it with a degree of sophistication. Dan spent over 70 hours over a period of 3 years and 70 different sessions with Sirhan, and we have filed his massive report and opinion and affidavit, and it's pretty clear that Sirhan was, in fact, put through a 2-week mind control session at a specific clinic.
Now, Sirhan claims that he doesn't remember shooting. Actually, he thought he was at a shooting range. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, this is what they had programmed him to recall, that he had been at a shooting range that afternoon, and he was programmed on cue, which was a pinch on the neck for the handler. The handler was a woman who attached herself to him in the hotel and went into the pantry and sat with him and effectively controlled him. He was used fundamentally just to distract. He was used to, on the pinch, to get up and see a target, a shooting range target in front of him, and then begin to pull the trigger. He got off 2 shots, and then he was swamped, and his hand was pinned to the table. Mm-hmm. And we have 6 eyewitnesses who saw him being pinned to the table after the second shot. So he kept pulling the trigger robotically, but his hand was on the table and the bullets were careening all over the pantry. Meanwhile, the actual assassin put 3 bullets at powder burn range into the back of Senator Kennedy, 2 through his coat and 1 through his right ear, which into the brain, which killed him. And that was the fatal shot. A 4th shot went through his shoulder pad. So 4 shots were fired from the rear. Sirhan was never toward the rear. He was always in front of the senator. I mean, we have 12 eyewitnesses, who independently always placed him in front of the senator, never behind him.
Amazing revelation. We're going to continue on with that.
It's extraordinary.
Now you can watch Alex Jones live at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
You can also browse the network, the Infowars Nightly News,
and over 60 movies and documentaries all together in one place.
You can watch the Alex Jones radio show live as it happened.
So check it out, Infowars.com/show.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm talking to Dr. William Pepper, and he's trying to get a retrial for Sirhan Sirhan, the accused killer of Robert Kennedy. And we were talking just before the break about how Sirhan Sirhan maintains, and Dr. Pepper's had testimony from expert psychologists, he maintains that he was under mind control, that he did not know where he was or what he was doing. He believed that he was shooting at a target range. And Dr. Pepper was just telling us before the break that he only got 2 shots off. And then people around him pinned his hand to the table. And he continued to fire until he fired all 8 shots. And he fired randomly into the crowd of spectators there. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy was killed with 3 shots from behind at point-blank range, as Dr. Pepper puts it, powder burn range. And he was just telling us about some of the details about that. This is not just assertions. Think about how this was played in the media. think about how they focused on the open and shut case. Here we have a person shooting Robert Kennedy as he's walking through the hotel lobby, and we've got it all on videotape, and here's what we saw, and they just tell you what they saw, and they don't talk about the fact that witnesses pinned his hand to the table after just 2 shots. They just maintain that that's the truth. It's a consistent story across the media because they only had 3 different networks. Now I guess you could say we've got basically one network that's telling the same story. People hear the same story every channel they turn to, so that's evidently the truth. But it's not, is it, Dr. Pepper?
No, it's certainly not the truth. The corporate media is not going to reveal the truthful facts about these kinds of cases because the government is involved. And they will continue and perpetuate the cover-up to the extent that they can for as long as they possibly can. You know, Carl Bernstein alerted us to the fact that there were over 400 intelligence agents spread throughout all of the media in America in very senior positions as well as stringers. And they make a point of influencing what goes in and what stays out. And the masses are not going to be told what really has happened.
There was some new evidence that came out in 2004. Tell us about that audio tape.
Yeah, there was an audio tape. It was a tape recorder that was running by it's called a Brzezinski tape by a journalist researcher who was there, and it had been known from the beginning, and it was a part of the archival evidence. But it was not possible to do the kind of very precise analysis of the sounds on that tape. It really that technology only developed in the middle of the 2000s, 2005, 2006. And we were able to get a computerized analysis of the sounds on the tape, and it indicated that 13 bullets, they identified 13 bullets as having been fired. The 13 bullets were fired from 2 different directions, west to east and east to west. Sirhan was firing east to west. Bullets came the other way from west to east. There were 2 different types of guns. They were both .22 calibers, but there was a slightly different. It's amazing that they can detail as a sort of like a radiological difference in the weapons that were fired, and there were some overlapping shots, which means when Sirhan fired his first the 2 shots, and then the balance from the table kept pulling the trigger, there were like shots 3, 4, for example, of the 13 were overlapping. So it was very clear there were 2 guns being fired in the pantry at that time, and that, of course, backs up the truth that Bob Kennedy was killed from the rear with bullets fired in a slightly upward angle with a gun virtually pressed against his body.
Now there was also some physical evidence about the bullets being fired at an upward angle too, wasn't there? Wasn't there some bullets that went into the ceiling or something like that?
Yeah, there were bullets. There were shots that went over and up into the dropped ceiling level, and the one that went through Bob's shoulder pad was another upward shot. There were 4 upward shots fired, 3 of which from behind him, 3 of which did hit him. But this is the kind of evidence and the kind of analysis. In some cases, either was not available or was not presented to the jury at the time. So we believe that there is a legitimate claim under law for Sirhan to be given. Well, we think he should be turned loose, frankly, because of the there were two of the bullets that were introduced in evidence were not the real fatal bullets. We've established that as well. They were not bullets that were fired from Sirhan's gun. So the evidence is so strong that we think actual innocence is clear, and if he's not going to turn him loose, of course, but we would hope they would give him a new trial. If they won't give him a new trial, we would hope at least we can get an evidentiary hearing where, for the first time, all of this new evidence can be put out under oath. That's really what we would like to see happen. This is a man who's been in prison, as you can imagine, for all of these years, and for a crime that he didn't commit.
That's right. You might even consider doing a documentary. I mean, when we go back and look at the Oklahoma City bombings, the Noble Lie went back and talked to so many eyewitnesses and put together so much information. I was aware of a lot of what had been discovered at the time that it happened. I was following it. I knew about the bomb blast patterns not matching, and being testified to that by a former general who was a demolitions expert, not matching the kind of blast pattern that you would have from a single bomb, single point source. There was a lot of information like that it was pretty clear that it didn't match the official story. There was, like I said, about Flight 800, we had a lot of eyewitnesses talking about seeing flares, identifying it as a missile, as a cruise missile, surface-to-air missile. But in each of these cases, we see that the FBI is going around and not just not doing an investigation, but actually taking evidence away. And so that's why I think part of the Sirhan story, as we point out, involves mind control. And that's something that people have kind of laughed off as conspiracy theories or science fiction. That's what but as you said, and as we know, and as this documentary, State of the Mind, is going to point out, it is very well documented. This has been going on for a very long time. It was in the 1950s that Frank Olson died as we believe, at the hands of the CIA, as his family maintains. And he was part of mind control experiments at that time in the mid-50s that have been going on for quite some time. So I think it's very important. Maybe you might consider doing a documentary to get the story out.
Well, I'm not a filmmaker. I'm a lawyer. I'm happy to cooperate with people who want to do documentaries on these kinds of cases.
Sure.
But I've got to keep my eye on the issues and do what a human rights lawyer should do. Try to right a wrong, rectify an injustice, and that's
absolutely
a pretty big task in itself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I understand. You're not a filmmaker, you're a lawyer, and you do what you do very well, and we really appreciate you standing up for the truth. Now, you've got a new trial that is coming up that you wanted to talk about that you've just started as well. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's in the early stages yet, and it's a work of a man who named Peter Janney, who has published a book called Mary's Mosaic. Peter has worked for about 35 years on that case. The Mary in it is Mary Meyer. Now, the fascinating thing about this case, it's a 50-year-old case. She was assassinated in 1964 in Washington, D.C. She was the only woman Jack Kennedy ever loved and was very, very close to him, and it's quite clear he was going to marry her. I mean, people close to them knew that and said that after the second term. Mary had been married, she's a very prominent Washington person, had been married to Cord Meyer, who was a deputy director of the CIA. And she just had so much of their operations that she couldn't take it, and she divorced him. And then she became close to Jack Kennedy, and they really had a mission for peace. She was about turning him into a real fighter, a warrior, if you will, for peace. And Jack Kennedy, as you know, delivered a famous speech at American University and began to turn directly in that issue. It was beyond that. I mean, she got Tim Leary up at Harvard to give her acid, and she took the president, believe it or not, on his only acid trip to try to open him up. And I think she was very successful and very much in love. And as Peter Janney has documented so well in his book and his work, she came to a point when they assassinated Jack Kennedy. She knew how it happened, and she waited for the Warren Commission report to come out. That report was a total cover-up, as many people believe.
Oh, yeah.
She confronted her ex-husband, Cord Meyer, and said that quite clearly she was going to blow the whistle on him and Jim Angleton and the agency because of their involvement in the assassination if they didn't allow the truth to come forward about how Jack was killed. Well, this is a brave and courageous and marvelous woman, and frankly, they then assassinated her. They killed her on a towpath when she went for a daily walk outside of her home in Georgetown. They had her assassinated. They set up a black guy, Ray Crump. They tried him, and a wonderful, talented lawyer named W. Roundtree got him acquitted because they didn't have the evidence. They didn't have any forensics, any fibers, they had no evidence. And a witness saw someone, allegedly, this was a part of the staging, standing over the body, was 5 foot 8 inches tall, 185 pounds. Crump was about 5'3", 135 pounds. I mean, it was ludicrous. So the jury, and that's why we love the jury system, isn't it? They acquitted this guy. So it's been an unsolved murder to this point in time. And Peter Janney has identified a key person who was involved in that conspiracy. And yes, he apparently was an intelligence agent. He was there. He was on the scene. And he was used. And we are looking at a way, and it's not easy, as you can imagine, after 50 years, but we're looking at a way to try to bring this into a courtroom where all of the evidence that Peter has uncovered can be put before a judge and jury. And I took this on. I watched Peter's work for a number of years and advised him, stayed in the background, finally agreed to do it, to come on as his counsel, because I came to see that this is maybe the most important of the assassinations because it links. It links to the assassination of Jack Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, because she was, of course, involved in discussions with the two of them in terms of all kinds of matters. She visited the White House 40 times in the October before the president was killed in November.
Wow.
So she's very powerful, behind-the-scenes influence to combat the Cold War and to bring America away from the Cold War into a peaceful perspective. And, of course, that's one of the things that was held against John Kennedy, that he was looking to normalize relations with Cuba, that he had entered into serious discussions with Khrushchev.
Well, you talk about Kennedy's peace movements. He actually stopped Operation Northwoods, which is really kind of a template for 9/11. If people want to know why we believe, one of the reasons why we believe it is because they had planned it decades before, doing exactly the same thing.
He walked out of the one time after another. The Joint Chiefs came at him. Curtis LeMay and Lemnitzer came at him. They wanted a preemptive strike on the Soviet Union, a nuclear strike. I mean, one thing after another. These military guys were on Kennedy, and when he questioned them specifically and precisely about details, they didn't have them. They didn't know that there were 100 land-based surface missiles throughout Cuba. They didn't even know that. And if there had been the invasion that they were looking to mount, it would have been a disaster for mainland United States as well as for any invading force.
Absolutely. Yeah, for people who don't know, I mean, look at Operation Northwoods. That was a plan to fly planes into buildings and blame it on Cuba so they could have an excuse to attack Cuba. It was a plan to do bombs in civilian areas, a campaign of terrorism, so they could blame it on Cuba and then invade Cuba.
Exactly right.
And when Lemnitzer was let go by Kennedy, he goes to NATO, and you see in NATO, you see Operation Gladio, where they had a campaign of terror there that they then turned around and blamed on the communists so they could move their agenda forward there.
Well, there's no question about that. And if Bob Kennedy had been elected president, he had made it, although on the record and officially he never made this commitment, but he did to some of who were very close to him. And he did say one of his first tasks was going to be to reopen the assassination of his brother. And in that, that's a collaboration right across with, with the encouragement, of course, of Mary Meyer. So I think this is a political assassination. People don't know about it. It's an unsolved murder. And I applaud Peter Janney for all of his work, and I'm happy to do what I can do to bring those facts to light because they relate to the other critical assassinations on either side of her death. And
yes.
I'm happy to do that.
Well, it's always a worthwhile thing to go in and search for the truth. And I really appreciate the fact that, as you said, you made sure that you had careful evidence. You went in and you looked for 10 years at the Martin Luther King assassination before you went into it. So we don't want to go in half-cocked about stuff, and we don't want to start throwing around wild accusations, but when you see something that's not right, when you see something that doesn't match the official story, it takes a lot of courage to go against that and to stand up and point out the emperor has no clothes, to say that this isn't true, that, here's what really happened, even especially when it's something like in the case of Sirhan Sirhan, where he talks about having been under mind control. The public is really not ready to accept that on a broad basis yet. We have a lot of education to do because, as we both said, this has been going on for over 60 years, and they've turned it into something of a science. This is something that the CIA, as well as other black ops, have been doing for quite a long time. We're going to be right back with Dr. William Pepper right after the break. Stay tuned.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex here in Austin. A little bit of housekeeping before we go back to our guest, Dr. William Pepper. Infidel Body Armor at infidelbodyarmor.com. Take a look at their product. It stops hundreds of rounds of AK-47, M4, 3060, 308, and more. It's ceramic armor, just stops 6 rounds, but this goes beyond that. This stops hundreds of rounds. It's related to level 3 body armor, and that number is 888-608-6605. That's 888-608-6605. And as we were talking about at the beginning of the hour, this amazing case out of Tennessee where just complaining about cloudy, bad-tasting water to the water board caused them to threaten the complainers with terrorism. Not just calling them loony, not just calling them conspiracy theorists, but threatening them and saying, you better be careful. We might talk to Homeland Security about you. We might out you as a terrorist. Well, you may not be able to get the bureaucrats to do anything to clean up the water, but you can take control of it yourself to some degree. If you live in an area like we do here in Austin where they dump a lot of garbage into the water, fluoride and other things, you can get a ProPure filter. You can get that at InfoWarsStore.com. You can get 10% off. It's gravity filtration. It's the best way to purify your water. Unlike reverse osmosis or distillation, the ProPure filters don't eliminate the beneficial minerals that are found naturally in the water. Something you can do to help the operation and to take some control over your life, because there's only so much you can do to get these arrogant bureaucrats. You can't get them to stop spending massive amounts of money to take the waste from the aluminum and nuclear industry, the fluoride, and start dumping it into your water. Even if you believe that that is beneficial, and there's much, much science to show that it isn't, to show that it increases bone cancer and other illnesses, even if you believed that it was effective, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to mass medicate a population by putting stuff in the water supply. You're always going to get people that are under-medicated or over-medicated, even if it were effective, and it's not effective. But we were talking to Dr. William Pepper, and he's defended Sirhan Sirhan, trying to get him another trial, trying to get it reopened based on new evidence that surfaced in 2004 about audio recordings that show that there were multiple guns and that there were 13 shots fired, and talking about how there was even physical evidence of these shots in the ceiling. It was upward shots, shot from behind, that actually killed Robert Kennedy. and Sirhan Sirhan was in front, and he was actually maintains that he did not know where he was. He didn't know that he had shot Robert Kennedy. He was told that he had and believed it based on what he had been told. Sounds very similar to the shooting that we had in Aurora, Colorado. And there's a lot to be done in terms of educating the public as to what the CIA has been doing. We had some revelations of the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s where the CIA confessed to quite a bit of things that was news to the general public that had been talked about by other people. And we know that for at least 60 years, the government has been making a science out of mind control. That's something that the general public just doesn't understand yet. And we have a documentary that's coming out that you can pre-book right now at InfoWarsStore.com, Mind Control. It's about the psychology of mind control and what's been done in these programs over the last several decades. Dr. Pepper, we were just talking about the new trial that you're getting involved in. Tell us a little bit about that, and we've got a couple of more minutes. Tell us where you want to try to take that. You said you're trying to get that case reopened and actually, I guess, trying to do a prosecution based on the evidence that you've got there. Is that correct?
Well, I think we're exploring all of the possible avenues. The whole idea is to get a judicial setting, whether it's civil or criminal, where the evidence that Peter Janney has dug up and others have dug up as well.
Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at InfoWars.com/show.